There was once a man who lived in a small village nestled between two mountains. He was known for his temper, a fire that burned so brightly it often left him scorched and those around him weary. His name was forgotten over time, but his story was not. He was a blacksmith, a craftsman of iron and fire, and his hands were as rough as the tools he forged. But his heart was a furnace, always on the brink of eruption. One day, a traveler came to the village, a monk with a face as calm as a still lake. The monk had heard of the blacksmith's temper and sought him out, not to scold or lecture, but to offer a simple gift, a small, unpolished stone. "This," the monk said, "is a mirror. Hold it when you feel the fire rise within you, and it will show you what you cannot see." The blacksmith laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the mountains. "A stone? What good is a stone to me?" But the monk only smiled and left, leaving the stone on the anvil. Days passed, and the blacksmith forgot about the stone. But then, one afternoon, a customer complained about a sword he had commissioned. The blade was too heavy, he said, and the balance was off. The blacksmith's face flushed red. His hands clenched into fists. He opened his mouth to shout, to defend his work, but his eyes fell on the stone. For reasons he couldn't explain. He picked it up. The surface was rough, cold against his palm. He stared into it, expecting to see his own reflection. But instead, he saw something else, a man consumed by fire. His eyes wild, his face twisted in rage. It was him, but it wasn't him, not the man he wanted to be. He dropped the stone, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. For the first time, he saw himself clearly, not as a victim of his temper, but as its creator. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of the man in the stone haunted him. He thought of all the times his anger had burned bridges, driven people away, left him alone in the ashes of his own making. He thought of the monk's calm smile, the way he had offered the stone without judgment or expectation. And he realized something. The fire within him wasn't his enemy. It was his tool, just like the hammer and anvil. But he had been using it blindly, without control, without purpose. The next morning, he went to the mountains. He climbed until his legs ached and his lungs burned, until he reached a place where the air was thin and the world felt vast. There, he sat and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for, but he knew he needed to listen, not to the voices in his head, but to the silence around him. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time seemed to stretch and bend, like metal under heat. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind, or his own heartbeat. It was a whisper, a single word: breathe. He closed his eyes and did as it said. He breathed in the cold mountain air, felt it fill his lungs, cool the fire within him. He breathed out, releasing the tension in his shoulders, the tightness in his chest. And as he breathed, he began to see, not with his eyes, but with something deeper, something older. He saw the fire not as a force to be feared, but as a gift. It was energy, passion, life, but it needed to be tempered, shaped, just like the iron he worked with. It needed a balance, a counterweight. When he returned to the village, he was different, not because his temper was gone, it wasn't, but because he had learned to hold it, to shape it. He still felt the fire rise within him, But now he knew what to do. He would pick up the stone, look into its rough surface, and see the man he could become. He would breathe, and in that breath, he would find the space between impulse and action, between reaction and response, and slowly, over time, the fire became his ally. It no longer consumed him. It fueled him. The villagers noticed the change. They saw the way he spoke more softly, the way his hands moved with precision rather than force. They saw the way he listened, truly listened, before he spoke, and they began to come to him not just for swords and tools, but for advice, for wisdom. He became a mirror for them, reflecting not their flaws, but their potential. Years later, the monk returned. He found the blacksmith in his workshop, bent over a piece of iron, his hands steady, his face calm. The blacksmith looked up and smiled. "The stone," he said, "it showed me what I could not see." The monk nodded. "And what did you see?" The blacksmith paused, his eyes distant, as if looking into the past. "I saw a man who thought he was defined by his anger. But I was wrong. Anger is not who we are. It is what we feel. And what we feel does not have to control us. We can choose. We can breathe. We can shape the fire, instead of letting it shape us." The monk smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "And now," he said, "you are the mirror." The blacksmith looked down at the stone, now smooth and polished from years of use. He saw his reflection, not as a man consumed by fire, but as a man who had learned to wield it. And in that moment, he understood, the greatest mastery is not over the world, but over oneself.